Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on the region of the world that you're dialing in from. I wanted to set a little bit of context before we get into the content. And the premise of this webinar today is that information technology delivery is evolving. We're investing more in technology, and you can see a Forrester study that shows, roughly a 32% increase to $3 trillion US dollars annually. Business and technology solutions are becoming more complex, right? And complexity then drives cost, risk, time, schedule, all that kind of fun stuff. Are evolving their delivery models accordingly, and there's industry trends to that. And therefore, the premise is that project management competencies need to evolve as well. So that's sort of the theme that we're going to carry through today's presentation. And you'll see it's organized as such in the agenda. The first piece we'll talk about is the changing landscape. Then we'll get into what that evolved competency model should look like. And then lastly, talk about ways of improving proficiency in the competencies within that model. In the landscape, I think there's a pervasive theme of complexity. Pervasive, I mean it runs across all of these different areas. So from a business product perspective, a lot of products are becoming more individualized. Think Progressive has an individual solution for insurance. Apple has very individualized solutions for their products. Products are becoming more specialized, right? How many different versions of Fitbit do we have out there? So business products are becoming more specialized and individualized to people. Technology perspective, the solutions are becoming more complex with more integration points, vendors, programming languages, software pieces. From company structure and organizational structure model, they're evolving, becoming more matrixed, aligned to different products, different organizations, and so on. And then the processes and tools used to manage and govern the work has become complex as well. So pervasively increasing complexity across our organizations. Now, what that means, though, as project management professionals for us, is that there's implications to that, right? As these things on the left become more complex, the work that we have to manage becomes bigger, it's costlier, there's more risk, there's more partners and stakeholders that we have to integrate with, that we have to negotiate with, that we have to satisfy. That leads to matrix delivery models, right? Many programs now are very much matrix with different organizations and roles that span across, possibly specialization of roles. And so the point is there's real implications to this increase in complexity. And so we're in this model now where complexity is increasing and cost and schedule is increasing. And at the same time, companies are getting pressured to deliver faster, deliver cheaper, and continue with quality. So these two are very much at opposition with each other. I mean, I think even a few years ago, having a $20 or a $50 million program, maybe your Fortune 100 companies had one of them. Fortune 100 company right now, and we have probably 6 to 8 $50 million plus programs in our portfolio, right? The portfolio that I'm managing this year, my budget this year is $200 million, right? And that would have been considered outrageous a few years ago. And so with some of these strategies to improve delivery are things like outsourcing, right? Working with additional partners, shared services. I think everybody on the call is probably familiar with Agile and Scaled Agile, which is probably the newest trend in the marketplace. And so let's spend a minute on, actually I have that in a few slides. So the punchline of all of these is, as I mentioned, reducing quality, cost, don't want to reduce quality, improving quality, or at least sustaining it, and improving speed. And you can see, right, outsourcing has been a pretty hot trend for the last 20 years, certainly in IT, and that has the promise of reducing cost of delivery. These companies are all CMMI certified, so they all promote high quality, possibly faster delivery. Think about shared services, which is pooling resources together in the IT space. You see this happening with maybe testers, maybe database administrators. And the hypothesis there is that merging together, you have better quality. You can load up with more work, so there's economies of scale, and so on. And as I mentioned, agile delivery. is all of speed. It's all about iterative development, better quality of work because you're iterating, because you're prioritizing the most important work. And so all of these make sense, and all of these are needed to continue to sustain the cost, the quality, and the speed. But like with complexity, there's implications to our projects. It takes scaled Agile, right? The SAFe or scaled Agile framework. It's focused on a delivery model, right? There's constant reprioritization and iterations. There's a view into sort of an end-to-end focus, things like value streams. The work gets sort of federated out, right? And it makes sense. It's a very logical model. But in terms of then delivering on projects, we've now introduced other layers like value streams, like release trains. There's now many more stakeholders that we have to work with and understand the interdependencies of them. There's a whole set of metrics and transparency, right? So in order for scaled Agile to work properly, there's a lot of moving parts that need to be interconnected, that need to have dependencies identified, that need to be transparent in how they're progressing in order to aggregate that information. And it requires a different level of governance and decision-making. So again, not bad things, but just implications of moving to a scaled Agile model. And so if you sort of, take these last few slides and pull them together, the work is becoming more complex. There's more partners to work with and different partners. Delivery structures are evolving. More metrics and transparency and faster decision-making all requires different competencies of the project managers to manage the work. So as the work becomes more complex and bigger, it requires more fundamentals and diligence in managing and tracking all of that work. As you have more stakeholders and become matrixed organizations and so on, you now need to negotiate with other resources, influence teams outside of your direct span of control. A lot more communication and facilitation are needed. Same thing around the metrics. In terms of faster decision, right, better judgment, critical thinking, continue to facilitate. So you can see that if you believe the premise of the first part of this, which is the work is becoming more complex, and you believe that that complexity has implications on the projects, then you have to believe that the project management skills need to evolve as well. And so those things, and I wanted to corroborate my findings, which ultimately led up to my most recent book. But what I did was I put a survey out to every project management professional I could find, on all the LinkedIn groups I could find, all of my colleagues and so on. And I got, roughly 350 responses. You'll see the demographics of the people here. I mean, pretty seasoned people, right? On average, 15 years of experience, $50 million worth of delivery, teams 100 plus in size, right? So pretty good grounding, and you can see the ranges, right? So the range suggests that we have a good variability of resources and backgrounds. And so I started with a bunch of simple questions of, do you believe that these things are becoming more complex, right? Processes, organizations, and so on. And overwhelmingly, you could, 68% said, yep, processes and tools have become more complex over the last 5 years. 70% said organizations, right? Almost 90% said technology, and so on. And I suspect, right, everyone on this call would say, yep, that's not surprising. We all think stuff has become more complex over the last 5 years. But, I wanted sort of a fact base to substantiate that. Getting into skill sets, and I said, well, on a typical week, today and 5 years ago, where do you spend most of your time? And what's interesting is, as compared to 5 years ago, the amount of time spent on project management fundamentals went from 35% to 24%, right? So an 11% decrease in PM fundamentals, things like managing plans and schedules and resources and finance. And that time was spent, the difference in time lost was spent on things like soft skills, leadership, and communication. And so I think that's, an interesting set of statistics that suggests that we are spending less time on sort of the classical project management skills and moving more towards the consultative type skills, and I'll talk about what that